Now folks, the gallows himself stood right about here, and this is known because of pictures that were taken prior to Hugo, as well as artist sketchings kind of confirmed the placement. The gallows that were on these grounds, though, looked much different than the ones that you and I are used to seeing. The gallows we typically see in movies have a staircase, a platform, and a trap door. These gallows were actually known as counterweight gallows. This simply means that your own body weight is not being used to kill you. There's a separate weight. The weight that was here was about 600 pounds. It was made out of cast iron, it was shaped into a cylinder, and that's going to be dropped into a 5-foot well. That's attached to one end of your noose. You are on the other. And to help the process, the scaffolding here was 27 feet tall with a pulley system on it. Now on paper, this seems like a really simple idea. Drop the weight, victims jerk in the air, neck breaks, they die. Height, weight, and length of rope all play roles in how you die. So let's say the rope itself happens to be too short. The weight drops, you're flung up in the air like a rocket ship. And this can have so much force behind it, it's been known to decapitate people instantly. On the other hand, the rope itself happens to be too long, the weight drops, but there's not enough force for the neck to break. So you end up strangling. Longest strangulation recorded on the grounds was 39 minutes. That was back in 1911. That was the last execution given here on the grounds, and sadly to say, it was given to a young gentleman who was only 17 years of age. His name was Daniel Duncan, and his crime was that of murder. Now, Daniel's story does not start here. It begins down on King Street. Daniel said he walked into a local tailoring shop one afternoon. He said when he strolled inside, he didn't see the tailor, but he did happen to notice a trail of blood on the ground. Curiosity got the best of him. He followed the trail, and in the back room he said he found a tailor stabbed several times. Now, most people stumbling upon a scene like that would probably call the cops and get out of Dodge, leave the building. Daniel said he had to figure out if the man was alive, so he knelt down near the man, but it only took him a matter of minutes to realize that tailor was stone cold dead. And so he panics, he runs out of the place. What Daniel did not realize is that the shoemaker across the street happened to witness Daniel walk into the shop very calm, and saw him come rushing out covered in blood. If you were the shoemaker, what would you think?
You killed him.
Yeah, it looked really, really bad, right? So, the police are called, and a few days later, Daniel's picked up. Now, let's skip ahead to the trial. The lawyers, they pull any plausible evidence to convict Daniel. They used the bloody clothing against him, as well as that, quote, eyewitness of the shoemaker. But the real underlying reason why Daniel happened to be convicted had nothing to do with the physical evidence that the lawyer was presenting. It had more so to deal with the fact that Daniel was 17 years of age and black. The victim was white. Racial tensions in 1911 in Charleston were extremely high. For this, Daniel's convicted and sentenced to jail for 6 weeks prior to his execution. Now, on the day of his execution, his parents were here. You were allowed to invite a family member to come take your body after death. Unfortunately, they actually had to witness the execution to begin with. So you can only imagine how Mr. and Mrs. Duncan felt seeing their only child cross these grounds, shackled from head to toe. And when Daniel got to the gallows, the hangman noted that Daniel never shed a single tear. The weight was dropped, and the hangman soon realized that rope was far too long. So, left unconscious, Daniel was there for 39 minutes and strangled to death. Eventually, a doctor in the city pronounced him dead, released his body to his parents, who ended up burying him outside the city. And the next day, there was an article in the paper about Daniel's execution. Now, that wasn't uncommon. Executions were actually a really big deal in most cities. But it was said, according to legend, that the real killer actually read that article and felt so overwhelmed with guilt that this young man had to die for his actions that he actually ended up turning himself into the police. Folks, I've never found a scrap of evidence that proves this is true, but there are folks in Charleston 100 years later that are trying to prove Daniel's name innocent. They're trying to clear him. There are folks, though, on the complete opposite side of the spectrum that simply go by the court records, say he's guilty as sin. I cannot be biased either way. I was not in the courtroom, I do not know how the trial played out, I do not know exactly what was said. What I do find to be upsetting is the fact that Daniel was 17. His life ended before it could even really begin. And for a parent to be put through such torture of watching their child slowly but surely suffocate, slowly choke to death, it's uncalled for on so many levels. But of all the stories you're going to hear tonight, Daniel's will ultimately be the saddest. And the reason is, from this point onward, I only speak of stories of the guilty. There are no sad stories for those. Follow me.